This city just declared bankruptcy, and unless something changes in the UK pretty soon, it's unlikely to be the last.
I'm in Birmingham, the UK's second most populous city, home of the Peaky Blinders, Black Sabbath, Cadbury Chocolate, Aston Villa Football Club, and a genuinely interesting pen museum. Birmingham has long been a trend-setting town, but at the end of last summer, it became a pioneer in a slightly less desirable sense, when the city's council announced that it had gone bust.
A British city declaring itself bankrupt like this is usually an exceptionally rare event.
Between 1988 and 2018, just 2 English councils ever found themselves in such a terrifying position. In the 6 years since, however, the number of cities falling into financial turmoil has skyrocketed. 6 local councils have declared themselves effectively bankrupt since 2021, and it seems unlikely that they'll be the last. A recent survey by the Local Government Association found that nearly 1 in 5 council chiefs in England feared their council could similarly run out of cash in the next 2 years.
I've blocked 4 days out my schedule, booked 3 travel lodges, and committed to driving an inadvisable distance in order to visit 4 British cities or counties which have recently gone bust, and to try and figure out exactly what's going wrong here. As well as visiting one city which is experimenting with a whole new model of governance, which can hopefully help cities to avoid a similar fate in the future. Morning. So welcome to the car. This will be our home for the next 4 days, 3 nights. So we have sort of all the basic features. 5 wheels, 1 for steering. I think it's going to be good.
So here's the plan. Over the next 3 days, we're going to be visiting 4 cities and counties, all of which have gone broke over the last few years. We're driving up to Birmingham, down to Northamptonshire, back up to Nottingham, across to Liverpool, which hasn't gone bankrupt, but I'll explain why later, way back down to Woking, and then, well, I've got an additional surprise destination for day 3, but I'm going to keep that under wraps for now.
I'm not going to lie, I am a little bit apprehensive of how much driving I've got to do over the next few days, as well as whether we can try and squeeze in all the filming we want to do in each location with the time that we've got. But trying to tell this story from like behind my desk back at home didn't feel like it would quite capture the scale of the crisis that British cities are currently facing. Okay, the sun is up, we've had some breakfast, we are on the M5 and have avoided accidentally getting the bridge to South Wales, and next stop is Birmingham.
With the council being bankrupt, they're saying that now youth clubs are, not getting opened, and I think it's just detrimental to the youth.
Buses as well, because they're heavily packed. Like the other day, I'm fasting, and I left uni about 2 hours early to get home on time, and I was on the bus for about an hour and a half, when usually it should take 25 minutes. And that was really exhausting.
They're talking about the collections going from 1 week to 2 weeks. So it's the little things that you're starting to notice that it just makes me a bit sad.
This structure behind me is the Alexander Stadium, the largest purpose-built athletic stadium anywhere in the UK.
Just 2 years ago, this arena played host to the opening ceremony of the Commonwealth Games, a kind of off-brand Olympics for ex-members of the British Empire. And Birmingham was a fitting choice for such an event. Not only does it have a rich history as one of the crucibles of Britain's Industrial Revolution, but a steady stream of global migration to the city has made it one of Europe's most diverse.
In the lead up to the Commonwealth Games, Birmingham City Council's then leader, Ian Ward, had promised the event would kick off what he described as a golden decade of opportunity for the city, inviting all kinds of new jobs, opportunities and investment.
But whatever optimism might have buzzed through the city during those 2 weeks of pole vault and pentathlon, it's safe to say those grander promises now ring pretty hollow.
I'm Julian Pritchard. I'm a Green Party councillor presenting the ward of Drury Heath and Money Hall, which is in the south of Birmingham. Birmingham City Council is often said it's the biggest local authority in Europe. Certainly it covers the biggest population, certainly and definitely in the UK. The council is Labour run, so Labour have a majority on Birmingham City Council. So I'm in opposition. I mean, I don't think any of my ward gets a good deal, to be honest, out of the council. We're now potentially even going to lose even more. So we have a library and we have a youth centre. We potentially might lose both of those.
See, back in September 2023, Birmingham City Council's Director of Finance uploaded this letter to the city's website.
This document is what's called a Section 114 notice, and it is, in effect, a financial distress signal. In publishing a Section 114 notice, the city was formally notifying the UK central government in Westminster that its projected income for the coming year in taxes and other revenue was not able to cover the cost of its projected outgoings.
The consequences of admitting financial defeat in this way are pretty dire.
Here in Birmingham, residents are preparing for an unprecedented 21% hike in local property taxes to try and dig the city out of its financial hole, while council-run services are being cut to the bone. This ranges from a 100% cut to all arts funding in the city, to a slashing of the support given to children and their families, to dimming street lamps to try and save on electricity. And it's not like council services were being lavishly funded around here to begin with. In fact, one councillor quipped last month that amid brutal cuts to bin collections and youth centres, the next decade was unlikely to be golden for anyone but rats and gangsters.
Now we've got, several million cuts worth to the library budget. Yeah, as I said, potentially all the libraries want to find the city. There's 36 at the moment, and they are going to potentially close up to 25 of those, so there'll be 11 left. It would be we would be losing something. The council is, we're supposed to be about trying to create neighbourhoods and communities and investing in areas, and if you take stuff out, then that makes it a lot harder to do.
So how did Birmingham go from such dazzling highs to such bleak lows in such a short period of time? And why has financial turmoil here caused anxieties in council buildings across the country? Okay, assuming I'm able to navigate the incredibly confusing roads, that is goodbye Birmingham.
There are a couple of events unique to Birmingham which have caused it to implode in quite such a spectacular fashion. The Section 114 letter, which officially announced the city's insolvency, placed the blame squarely on a series of equal pay disputes brought against the city council by current and former employees. Over the past 15 years, the city has repeatedly been found to have upheld discriminatory pay practices which caused women to be paid less than men. And having already paid out over £1 billion in settlements, it was suggested that the outstanding £760 million the city is still estimated to owe was the key reason for the council going bust.
This narrative has since come under question.
In March, accountant and academic James Brackley wrote a piece for The Conversation based on an extensive review he'd undertaken of Birmingham City Council's finances. Brackley found that the real reason for Birmingham's immediate financial turmoil was the fumbled implementation of a new accounting and HR system by the American company Oracle. Not only did migrating to the new Oracle software system end up costing more than 3 times what was initially quoted, but the software itself was highly dysfunctional. At points, council staff basically had no idea how much money was going out and coming in.
With these events in mind, it's tempting to view Birmingham's financial collapse as solely the result of mismanagement on the part of council leadership.
Michael Gove, the member of the UK central government in charge of overseeing local councils, did just that, blaming Birmingham's bankruptcy on, quote, poor leadership, weak governance, and woeful mismanagement of employee relations. Nevertheless, whilst bad decision making was clearly a factor in pushing Birmingham over the edge, the idea that the city's insolvency is only a product of compensation claims and bad computer systems begins to crumble the moment that we place Birmingham's troubles into wider context.
Because, as I mentioned at the top of this video, Birmingham was not the first city here in the UK to go bankrupt over the last few years, and neither was it the most recent. So it's worth me acknowledging that the place we're currently in, Northamptonshire, is not a city. In fact, it is very much a rural county. But the ways these things are governed in the UK is remarkably similar. I'll explain a bit more about it later, but just go with it now, please. It was from here in Northamptonshire that we got the first sign that things might not be entirely rosy in the world of British local government.
In 2018, the county council here became the third English council ever to issue a Section 114 notice, announcing itself effectively bankrupt. The fact that 18 years had passed since Hackney had been the most recent place to do so meant that it was easy to view this as a pretty exceptional event. The government commission tasked with investigating Northamptonshire Council's failure cracked out all their Microsoft Office skills to blame its insolvency on hubris on the part of local politicians and council staff.
Since then, however, the catastrophes have kept piling up.
Croydon, Slough, Thurrock, Woking, Birmingham, and most recently Nottingham have all announced they've run out of cash in the past 2 years. And even in cities which remain in the black for now, leaders are warning that their situation is so dire we might soon be facing, quote, the end of local government in the UK.
While there might be unique circumstances involved in all of these cases, then there's clearly something much larger going on here. But to understand that, we first need to take a little look at how local government here in the UK works. But that's a job for tomorrow because I am absolutely knackered. Oh.
We always vote,
Well,
yeah.
right, we
yeah.
all do, yeah.
Yeah.
Women died to get us to vote. We always vote.
Yeah, I think the vote's very important.
Yeah.
People are given a lot of time and effort and some of their lives, I suppose, over the years to guarantee what we can do today.
I've never voted.
No?
No.
In
They all think of themselves.
yeah.
They don't think of us.
Well, probably the one I vote for not go in. But it certainly not be the main parties because I don't rate them.
For the local election, we always go for the same people because they're so good to our area. They're so supportive. You can email them, they'll try and do something for you.
So we didn't actually plan to film this video like mere weeks out from a local election here in the UK. This video's been on the cards for ages, we just happened to make it now. But we've been in Nottingham city centre this morning chatting to people about whether they're planning on voting, how enthusiastic they are about that, what kind of issues really matter to them. And it's been a really interesting few hours. We've heard like a real range of opinions about people who aren't planning on voting at all, about people who believe it is a kind of fundamental civic duty that they should, people who are really angry at the council, people who absolutely have got these really heartwarming stories of councillors helping them out, which has been really lovely too. But in order to get on with the next part of the video, I first need to come good on my promise to explain exactly how local government here in the UK works.
I'm in Nottingham, just to the north of where we finished off yesterday's journey. Of all the cities we're visiting on this little road trip, Nottingham was the most recent to declare itself effectively bankrupt. And it's also the one which begins to point to the larger issues at play here.
Unlike Birmingham or Northamptonshire, Nottingham hasn't befallen any great financial calamity. There are no error-prone computers or council hubris here. And yet, the city has still managed to go bust.
Like most countries, the UK has multiple tiers of government, with different entities having different powers and responsibilities depending on where they sit in the hierarchy.
If that sounds fairly orderly, it's not. In fact, the whole system is so wildly inconsistent to the point that, depending on where one lives in the UK, one might be blessed with as few as 2 layers of government to deal with, or as many as 4.
Where I live, down in Plymouth, political governance is divided up between just 2 bodies. Matters of national importance are decided upon by the central government in London, whilst local matters are overseen by Plymouth City Council.
Nice and simple.
If, however, you're lucky enough to live in the picturesque village of Denmead in southeast England, various decisions affecting your life will be broken up between the Denmead Parish Council, the Winchester City Council, the Hampshire County Council, and only then the UK Parliament. You get to vote for representatives for all of those bodies, and if you have any issues, you have the additional fun of trying to work out which of those 4 representatives has the power to do anything about it.
To make matters even more confusing, some areas of England, such as Nottingham here, have recently become part of what are called combined authorities.
This involves neighbouring city or borough or county councils working together to coordinate transport and economic development plans, often under the auspices of a regional mayor. In London, this has actually taken a step further in the form of the Greater London Authority. Led by the London Mayor, the GLA has strategic responsibility for life across London's 32 boroughs, despite each of those boroughs having considerable day-to-day autonomy in their own right. Meanwhile, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland have their own national parliaments, which in those countries form a separate layer of government between local government and central government in London. And this is before we even begin to talk about the 9 administrative English regions which are used for some statistical purposes, or local police and crime commissioners.
All that being said, most people in the UK will have either 1 or 2 local councils which serve as their primary forms of local government. I mean, it's incredibly cool. Those councils might be called city councils or district councils or borough councils or county councils, depending on their size and how rural or urban they are. But whether or not they have a strategic body such as a combined authority above them, or a voluntary parish or town council which sits beneath, will usually be 1 or 2 bodies which have the largest impact on their lives. But what exactly is it that a local council does? The role of city, borough, district or county councils here in the UK then is very similar to that of city governments in other countries.
The central government in Westminster retains the power to issue currency, set trade policy and start and end wars, while local councils are in charge of operating on-the-ground services, such as housing, waste management, libraries, parks, street maintenance and delivering certain social care and family support services.
So I thought you'd bring you to some kind of council amenity for our second bit of filming in Nottingham. We've come to the Nottingham Arboretum, which is apparently the inspiration for Neverland in J.M. Barrie's Peter Pan. See, in the UK, central government actually has a pretty big say in how local councils run the areas they're responsible for.
For one, councils actually don't get a huge amount of choice in what services they provide. If you look down a list of services which tend to be provided by city and county councils in the UK, you'll find that some are what's called discretionary services. This means they're provided entirely at the council's own initiative.
While most councils will run glorious public parks like this one, leisure centres and museums to uplift local histories, there's nothing to say that they have to, other than the fear that local residents might vote them out if they don't.
Other services, however, are what are referred to as statutory services. This means that the central government in London has passed legislation which requires councils to provide those services by law. Local authorities, for example, are legally required to provide free bin collections. They have a legal responsibility to maintain roads and pavements, and they have a duty to provide welfare and safeguarding services for children and vulnerable adults.
Councillors might have a reasonable degree of flexibility in exactly how they provide these services, but they can't simply choose not to.
In fact, if you drive through a pothole in the UK and it damages your car, you're often entitled to claim compensation from the council responsible for that road for failing to keep it in a good enough state of repair.
This requirement to provide a minimal level of service is probably a good thing.
Turnout at local elections in the UK is depressingly low, and so it's probably good to have a defence against some mad libertarian taking over a city and deciding to just let vulnerable kids sleep on the street or something. The problem is that all of this stuff costs money. When it comes to raising funds to pay either for these core services or for discretionary services that councillors might want to provide for local residents on top of them, local governments have even less power. But if we're going to make tonight's travel lodge, we should probably talk about that one on the road to our next destination. This next stop is actually a bit of a detour, but I think it's really important to visit if we're going to tell this whole story properly. I mean, I don't know if I've explained how much I dislike driving yet, but yeah, I definitely wouldn't be adding an extra stop if I didn't feel it was important. So there are 4 ways in which city, borough and county councils in the UK generate money. The first is what in England, Scotland and Wales is called council tax, and what in Northern Ireland is called rates. These are both property taxes calculated based on the value of the property in which a resident lives. It's one charge for everyone who lives in a particular property, but there are discounts for people who live alone. Depending on where you live in the country and how fancy your house is, council tax might be as low as £763 a year for a cupboard in the City of London, or over £5,000 for a mansion in Rutland. I think a lot of people understandably assume that council tax covers a sizable portion of the cost of running a local government. But this is actually far from the case. If we take the example of Staffordshire County Council, whose jurisdiction we're currently driving through, we find that council tax accounted for just 37% of the body's income in the year 2023 to 2024. A further 10% came from business rates, which is another property tax which is similar to council tax but which is charged to businesses with premises within a council's jurisdiction. Offices, shops, factories, warehouses, bars and cafes can all be liable to pay business rates, which are calculated based on the rental value of a given unit. As with council tax, however, there are again discounts for smaller businesses and for charities. An equally paltry 6.5% came from what's labelled other income. This will include a wide range of income streams from services that the council charges for. Car parking, taxi licences, commercial waste collection, hire of council buildings for weddings and events. All of these services come with a charge and therefore generate direct income for the council. Now, the maths heads among you will have noticed that these figures don't come even close to hitting 100%. And that's because a full 46.5% of the council's revenue doesn't come from locally raised taxes on residents or businesses, but from grants provided to it from central government. Some of these government grants are pre-assigned and ring-fenced for certain services. More than half of the money that Staffordshire receives from central government, for example, comes in the form of the Dedicated Schools Grant. And this has to be spent on schools. A council can't simply decide to skimp on schooling in order to spend some of that money on something else instead. Other grants from the government will be more flexible, with councils being able to allocate money as it sees fit depending on local priorities. There are some obvious benefits to such a huge chunk of local councils' incomes coming through central government. Spatial inequality runs deep in the UK. The median weekly pay for a full-time employee in London is £796, whereas in North East England it's just £614. Capturing tax centrally through income tax and the like, and then distributing it outward to local councils, at least theoretically gives central government the power to soften the effects of this imbalance. That's not to say they act on that power as much as they should, but they at least could if they wanted. Nevertheless, the combination of such a large chunk of local councils' funding coming from central government, alongside the fact that that same central government also gets to tell councils what services they should prioritise through that system of statutory services, begins to place a big question mark over how autonomous local councils really are. All of which would make politicians in London seeking to place the blame for British cities going bankrupt entirely on city governments seem a bit questionable. Because rather than an unfortunate accident, this enfeeblement of local councils by the central government is very much by design. And our next stop will be able to show us why. I'm in Liverpool, where it is incredibly windy. Liverpool has long maintained a slightly distinct political identity to much of the rest of England.
Never was this clearer than in the 1980s.
Throughout the course of that decade, the UK as a whole thrice elected Margaret Thatcher on a platform of cutting taxes and reducing public expenditure. Many in Liverpool, however, remained deeply sceptical. In fact, in 1983, the city went in the complete opposite direction to the rest of the country by voting in a city council led by Militant, a left-wing faction within the Labour Party which couldn't have been more opposed to Thatcher if they tried. Where Thatcher sought to open up every aspect of national life to the free market, Militant sought to overthrow it entirely.
This animosity came to a head a year later, when Thatcher's government introduced legislation which placed a limit on the amount of tax local councils could raise from their residents.
This served the Conservatives' agenda in two ways. Not only did it reduce people's taxes, but by limiting the amount of money councils had available to spend, it forced councils to streamline services and thus further reduce the role of the state in people's everyday lives.
Militant-led Liverpool had other ideas.
Rather than reducing their spending, the City Council unveiled an ambitious programme of activity in which they pledged to build new houses, open new sports centres and provide a greater number of nursery places for local children. Crucially, the cost of all this required the council to set a budget in which their expenditure exceeded the income they were due to receive through government grants or through newly capped taxes. This was, and is, illegal for a city council to do. Nevertheless, local leaders adopted the slogan that it was better to break the law than break the poor, by allowing the city to drift into decline.
The response from the political establishment was swift. The council's hope had been that central government would be forced to plug the financial gap in the council's budget, but Thatcher refused to do so.
The Labour Party, who on the national level were under the firmly centrist leadership of Neil Kinnock, enthusiastically denounced the council as foolish idealists and suspended the politicians responsible. If Thatcher had already been keen to curb the power of local government, the Liverpool rebellion only emboldened her further. Her tenure was one of sweeping reductions to the role and agency of local councils. Alongside caps on local taxes, Thatcher also reduced councils' powers over schools and forced them to sell off huge quantities of social housing.
This war on local government was partly an economic crusade, but as the standoff with militant Liverpool highlights, there were political motivations at play too.
In an ideal world, the relationship between local government and national government would be one of mutual cooperation. But local politicians ever since have tended to view local councils as inherent obstacles to change. After all, it's no fun sweeping to power with some great vision for how you're going to change the country, only to have that vision frustrated by a bunch of disagreeable councillors in Liverpool or Surrey or anywhere else.
When the Conservatives were ousted in the late 1990s, it's telling that the incoming Labour government under Tony Blair didn't proceed to roll back Thatcher's reforms.
While they did increase local government funding, this came with strings attached in the form of targets and so-called performance indicators, which councils had to meet to appease Westminster. The lesson learned from Thatcher's tenure was clear, that local government needed to be constrained and controlled.
But more on that when we reach our final destination tomorrow morning. Okay, this is our Travelodge for night 2. The third one is actually for the end of the third day. And I thought I'd let you into this one because this one comes with its very own podcasting studio where you can, like, I really could have done interviews in here. Like, so what's your thoughts on local councils struggling for cash? Oh well, I think this and that, and actually I think it's like this. It's like I really think Travelodge could rebuild itself as a kind of studio of some description. Okay, it's actually not raining, which is some. Oh no, it is. Okay, every time I put my head up, it stops raining, and every time I take it down again. Right, let's get going. Oh, the parcel shelf's got stuck.
So, with my ability to see out my rearview mirror restored, we headed back down across the breadth of England to our final destination, Woking.
We are getting far closer to London than I usually like to be, but it kind of feels like it's correct towards the end of the video to kind of be approaching the corridors of power.
Woking. In February 2009, future Prime Minister of the UK, David Cameron, wrote an opinion piece for The Guardian. Which in itself seems kind of ludicrous now, this callback to an era when Conservatives at least occasionally had to pretend to be liberal technocrats. In the article, Cameron promised that if he were elected, his government would lead a programme of, quote, radical decentralisation to reach every corner of the country. He claimed to have acknowledged the extent to which previous governments have reduced the powers of local councils and to be promising a dramatic reversal of that trend.
On the surface, Cameron's government did appear to come good on this promise.
To name just one example, he pushed for a further rolling out of so-called metro mayors to provide strong, identifiable leaders for regions and cities outside London. And this initiative has had more than a little success. In Manchester, Labour Mayor Andy Burnham has been able to bring local buses back under city control, to improve support for people sleeping rough, and to develop plans to introduce a new city-accredited education pathway for local young people who want to enter technical careers. While mayors, devolution deals, and other less shiny reforms might have theoretically increased the autonomy of local government, however, the matter of money remains. And in this, the succession of Conservative Prime Ministers, which have held power since 2010, have been far less generous. In fact, according to the Institute for Government, core funding for local councils was cut by 40% between 2009 and 2020.
Whatever powers local councils might theoretically have gained then, they've been left with little cash to actually do much with these new abilities.
The whole system of statutory and discretionary services has begun to look ridiculous, as councillors have been forced to cut anything which isn't legally mandated to the bone. Budgets for park maintenance, for example, have been slashed by a third. Funding for local arts organisations has dropped by 40%. 60% of public loos across the country have been closed, and nearly 400 swimming pools in England have been shut down. Even where councils do legally have to provide a service, they've often had to reduce that provision to the bare minimum. Providing a library service might be a legal requirement, but the law is pretty vague about what that service needs to look like. As such, hundreds upon hundreds of libraries have been closed over the past decade, and others have been reduced to minimal opening times. Similarly, council youth centres, which used to cater to a wide range of young people, now have to focus their efforts on children who are already in need of intervention. Things were really brought to a head, however, by COVID. Where council budgets were already stretched, the pandemic introduced all kinds of new responsibilities which sent their outgoings soaring, at the same time as income through taxes and revenue-generating services like car parks took a nosedive.
While the government did occasionally provide some additional funding to councils during this period, it was rarely enough to cover the shortfall. And after 10 years of austerity, there simply isn't much left to cut.
In January, the BBC reported that UK councils were shouldering a collective debt of £97.8 billion. At time of recording, however, central government has refused to provide any additional financial support. Chancellor of the Exchequer Jeremy Hunt has instead suggested that councils should cut back on diversity and inclusion schemes.
Which, given Birmingham's bankruptcy was at least partly the result of the council there upholding widespread pay discrimination, is maybe a little inadvisable.
Elsewhere, ministers have allowed councils to sell off assets such as land, community centres, leisure centres and town halls to try and cover the shortfall in their day-to-day spending, which really exposes the heart of what's going on here. For the past decade, Conservative politicians have talked endlessly about the decentralisation of power. First it was localism, then devolution deals, then levelling up. By ruthlessly starving councils of cash, however, Cameron, May, Johnson, Truss and Sunak have essentially forced councils of all political stripes to follow a ruthless agenda of cost-cutting, privatisations and sell-offs. And the more local assets that are sold off, the more services that are transferred into private hands, the worse things are likely to get.
But despite how grim things are, and they are pretty grim, I didn't want to leave this video on an entirely depressing note. So we're going to round off our trip with something of a bonus level, by going to a city which is trying to do things a little bit differently, in a way which doesn't completely ameliorate the effects of economic downturns or government funding cuts, but does at least seek to bring wealth and, most importantly, power back to local communities. Welcome to Preston.
Preston is a relatively small city of around 150,000 people in northwest England.
And I will admit we cheated a bit here. We're actually filming this on the morning of day 3 before we go to Woking. But it felt like a horrific waste of carbon to drive all the way down to Woking, only to drive all the way back up to Preston, and then to drive all the way back down to the glorious southwest to go home. But nevertheless, welcome to Preston. To understand what Preston's been doing differently over the past few years and why, it's helpful first to understand some of the knock-on effects which the various privatisations and sell-offs which the central government has been encouraging councils to perform have on a place. Imagine you run a council, and that council employs a big team of waste collection staff. Folks who get up early in the morning to drive big lorries around town and collect everyone's bins.
If you directly employ that team, then a large chunk of the money that you pay them in wages will get spent locally in your town, on buying food and going to the cinema and doing escape rooms and whatever else it is that your fictional waste collection team are doing in their spare time. But now imagine that you privatise that service, by which I mean handing it over to a private company to run for profit. A few things happen. The first is that the company will likely look to quote-unquote streamline the service being provided to cut costs, as the now privatised Royal Mail has been petitioning to do by abandoning Saturday post deliveries. The second is that they'll likely look to employ a new waste collection team on supposedly quote-unquote more competitive terms, i.e. for less pay or at the very least less secure contracts. The third is that all that money that has been saved through this cost cutting becomes profit, which first gets deposited into the bank account of the company which now provides that service, and then gets distributed to that company's shareholders. Particularly where contracts are handed to a big company like Biffa or Viridor, both of which are owned by American investment firms, what happens is that some of that money which was previously being paid to local employees who would then spend at least some of it in local shops and bars and bowling alleys is now leaving the area entirely.
Since 2013, however, the City Council here in Preston have been experimenting with a new approach to city governance, which has come to be known as the Preston model, or more broadly, as community wealth building.
My name is Martin Rawlinson. I'm the Deputy Leader of the Council. I'm also in charge of the finances. It's a really tough landscape, local government right now, and has been for a number of years, and is not really getting any easier. The finances are very tight, 50% cuts. We've got half the staff that we used to have, half the money. We called it a fairness agenda at the beginning. It got labelled the Preston model by the former Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell some years ago, and that stuck. We looked at what we were spending and whether we were spending it in Preston or nearby. And we also got all the local anchor institutions, which are public bodies, which are never going to leave Preston, you know, the hospital, the university, the police, the colleges, housing associations. We got them involved. We got them to look at where they were spending their money. And it turns out they weren't spending very much in Preston or nearby. So we developed a programme whereby we encouraged this. And we doubled our spending in the local economy between 2013 and 15. And we looked at all the anchor institutions, and they'd increased their spending, and we trapped an extra £70 million in the Preston economy. Lots of these bodies are spending more money in Preston and the locality. The money circulates that little bit longer in the locality. The fact that it's in local people's pockets for longer, the money, means they decide where it goes next. That's what democratising wealth means. Whereas if it very quickly filters upwards to shareholders and wealthy people, then that choice is gone. We have no choice in when or if that money ever comes back. Alongside that, we've started to use our assets for public good. So we're building a huge cinema complex, which the private sector will not come in and do it in the city centre. So we're doing it on our land. We keep the land. When it's all paid for, it will be our building, publicly owned, public wealth. That will still be ours. And we'll have an asset worth X amount that will belong to the people of Preston and not the shareholders who, that would normally have been the model. Every penny we spend, every asset we've got, all the work we do directly benefits Preston, and we're not benefit some shareholder thousands of miles away.
None of this is a silver bullet to the problem of reduced funding from central government. But community wealth building here in Preston is seeing the council trying to leverage what power and resources it does have to improve the quality of jobs and services in the city. Where many other British cities and counties have been pushed by 14 years of Tory rule into a vicious cycle of cuts and layoffs and sell-offs and civic decline, Preston perhaps points to what could be possible if local governments were given the power and resources they perhaps need.
So making this video has felt like a real step up. Not only have we added vox pops and interviews to our repertoire, but spending 4 days on the road has been a pretty big undertaking. This hasn't only been the most logistically complex of any of the videos that we've made, but almost certainly the most expensive too. I hope all the added time and energy and resource that we put into it has come across in the final product. If you want to find out a little bit more about how this actual road trip portion of the process came together, then we put together a behind-the-scenes featurette DVD extra kind of thing for Nebula, in which you can see me come very close to tears as I take a million wrong turnings on Birmingham's rabbit warren of roads, get really excited about seeing a nuclear power station, and also develop a grand theory on the quality of British motorway services. That behind-the-scenes bonus video is available to watch exclusively over on my premium streaming service, Nebula. It allows you to watch all of our videos ad and sponsor-read free, as well as to get access to a rapidly expanding roster of exclusive films and series too. If you're into city governance and urban planning, then you'll be absolutely spoiled for choice. We recently overhauled how navigation works on Nebula and added really clear categories, and urbanism is a whole section with videos from City Nerd, RM Transit, City Beautiful, and many, many more. I also recently announced that I'm about to start work on a Nebula original feature called Boomers. I'll be popping my camera in a suitcase and travelling around Europe and North America to explore how the baby boomers changed the world for better and, sometimes maybe a lot worse, and to explore why age so often today seems to equal wealth and power. I'll have a little bit more to reveal about Boomers soon, but in the meantime, if you'd like to support me to make high quality, hopefully ambitious videos like this one, then you can do so by signing up to Nebula using my personal link go.nebula.tv/Tom Nicholas. This gets you access to 40% off an annual subscription, bringing the price down to just $2.50 a month. Or if you don't want to add another recurring fee to your monthly budget, then you can also get access to a lifetime subscription at the moment too. We first experimented with this back last year as a way to raise a bunch of money to fund prestige original work like Boomers, Jetlag the Game, and Patrick Williams' great Star Wars holiday special. The link to check all of this out and to sign yourself up for a lifetime, annual or monthly subscription to Nebula is go.nebula.tv/Tom Nicholas.
Thank you so much once again for watching this video. I hope that you've enjoyed it or found it interesting in some way. If you know anyone else who you think also might get something out of this one, then I would absolutely love it if you would share it with them. If you would like to support what we do around here, making these videos, then you can do so either by signing up to Nebula using that link that I shared a moment ago and which should be on screen right now, or by signing up to support me over on Patreon. which if you do so, you'll be joining these lovely people: Richard, Alan Gann, Gary, Dickon Spain, Bill Mitchell, Al Zweigart, ZC Reese, Zoe Alden, Alexander Blank, Neil Zabildgaard, Sophia R, Sergio Suarez, Strange Weekend, Richard Rapoon, Amit Singh Parahar, Gabriel Koch, Jimmy Dunn, Christopher Cowan, Fiasco Linguini, Agent Maxwell, Glenn Sugden, Jarabar, and Katie Marshall. If you'd like to join all those wonderful people in getting access to weekly updates on what I'm working on, early access to snippets of the stuff that's coming out next, copies of the scripts to my videos, and a bunch of other stuff, then you can find out how to do so at patreon.com/Tom Nicholas. Thank you so much for watching once again, and have a fantastic week.